You are now listening to The Project. To The Project. To The Project. Where we stop at nothing to bring you the right facts on health, fitness, and psychology. Featuring some of the world's most experienced professionals so you can learn, lift, and live. With your hosts, Meg, Dr.D, and Mehdi. The changes were within 3 days to my mood, and not only that, to my performance. I reduced my carbohydrates, but, I was eating like 2 handfuls of vegetables. And within 4 days, I saw huge changes. My strength went through the absolute roof.
So for me, I find when it comes to food, the more strict I am, the more rigid I am, the more compulsively I think about that thing. It's this fine balance to going wow, yes, I can have anything I want at any time, but I know what the consequences are.
The time that you say I'm going to go on a diet, that's the day you eat the most. And
Totally.
It's because you become so obsessed with it, and also because you don't want this diet to be in control of you. I think this is all human behavior.
All this and more in today's episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this episode. And we are bringing back Shauna from Alaya Naturals. And this time we're going to talk a little bit of psychology with Dr. D. Everyone knows Dr. D. So it's great to have you two on the podcast together now in this episode so we can break down, some of the things that we kind of touched on in the last episode, the psychology of food, supplements, affecting our mood, and, just kind of taking control of that part of your life. And, you had talked about control a lot in the last episode. And I think it's very important that people need to know that they do have control. And, sometimes you have a lot of control and sometimes you have no control. And sometimes maybe it's good to dance in the middle. So I figured, let's try and dive into that a little bit today.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Shauna. I can't wait till I hear this. Because, I work with a lot of patients and in private practice. And, I'm not really an expert in eating, but I just know from my own experience is that I was just complaining to Mehdi about for the last 2 weeks, I've been feeling bloated. I feel retaining water. I'm not doing anything different than I did. I still work out, even though I don't like it, but I do it.
Yeah, good for you.
And I keep on telling, every time I see someone, or when I first see them, I say, look, there's 3 things you got to do. One of them is food. Because I see people are depressed, anxious, OCD, panic attacks. And so I think it's so great to have you on and to just kind of really emphasize, because I don't really think people really understand what you put in your body has something to do. 'Cause for me, the last 2 weeks, I'm pissed off.
Yeah, totally. Right. Because you're not absorbing your food, it sounds like.
No, and I feel like my body's bloated. I can't think. I just feel like a balloon, and it just
Did you do anything?
Me.
Okay, now we need to troubleshoot for a second. Did you change anything in what you're drinking or eating, or the times of when you're drinking or eating, or how you're combining those?
Well, I was just talking about that. I just recently had heard that you can drink cinnamon in your water. So I thought, well, let me just eat. I drink water all day. I'm sitting all day because I teach and I do teletherapy. So, and I was like, well, maybe it's a cinnamon. Maybe it doesn't, I Googled it. Does cinnamon make you bloated? Does this? And everyone's saying it's great for you, but I don't think it was great for me.
So is that the one thing that you've changed?
Yes.
So take it out because, first of all, Google, I learned when I was pregnant with my first child and I went down this really dangerous Google rabbit hole. I had a very benign question and it led to 4,000 responses of the very, sort of scared women online having shared their personal stories. Their story isn't my story, isn't your story. Their cinnamon victory is your cinnamon demise. So I would cut the cinnamon out. Now, I'm not a cinnamon expert. I know that Ceylon cinnamon in particular, I think has anti-inflammatory effects. I also know that cinnamon has a tendency, I believe, to help regulate blood sugar. It could be having a different effect on you because if you're finding yourself moody, and the only thing that you've changed is the cinnamon, I wonder if your blood sugar's off.
It could be because I don't have I'm not high blood pressure. I don't have anything. So I was like, well, maybe it's decreasing my blood levels. Maybe I did read that. It says that it helps people that regulate your sugar levels. And I don't have any blood pressure. So I figured, well, maybe it's not working. It is the only thing that I can think of that really I've done something different. But anyways, in regards to my story, I could see why. I mean, one thing you change can really make an effect on your body, and it can cause bacteria. Maybe it did cause bacteria. Maybe I have an infection. Who knows? But I just know how moody I have become. Not even moody, like I'm like lethargic in a sense, like
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I've experienced that for many years since having kids.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I think that it's really important to note that what you add to your diet has an effect, and also what you omit. So it goes both ways. If there are vitamins and minerals that are missing from your diet, that's as a powerful of an effect as having things in your diet that really don't belong there. So, it's kind of important to look at the overall picture of what you're eating and not eating. And the easiest way, if something has shifted in your body, to determine what that is to break your diet down to the very, very basics and essentials and cut out all of the inflammatory foods. So that tends to be things like gluten, sugar, processed food, dairy, soy, things of that nature, and or anything new that you've added, and work off of a very, very basic diet for a couple weeks, and then slowly add things back in and say, give yourself 3 days after you add a different food product or a supplement back in to really take note of how your body has changed and what may or may not be working for you.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely try it. But I mean, I think people should be aware of what they eat. And I mean, like when I'm talking to my clients about it, they're like, what? I mean, some of them are like, yeah. But a lot of times I know they're not getting it. I know that they're like, yeah, just to shut me off.
Right, because we haven't been taught that what we put in our body affects our emotional state. And as a psychologist, you're a PsyD. So you're actually a psychiatrist, right?
No,
so
I'm a psychologist, clinical.
You're a psychologist, a clinical. Right. So practical. I love it. I was in grad school for clinical psychology for a year.
Okay.
I just finished the program. I actually ended up moving to New York. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. And I ended up moving to New York a year into the program to pursue music full time. But I will say that we don't equate food with drugs, but it is like consuming a drug. I mean, food affects us chemically the way drugs do. And so, a lot of people still haven't integrated this awareness that everything we put in our bodies, definitely, it really transforms and deeply influences our brain chemistry. And that can lead to depression or anxiety. It can help abate and soothe depression or anxiety. And I've had many experiences over the course of my life where I've deeply been impacted by not having enough of the right foods, like I was saying before, or having too many foods that were inflammatory for my body. So there is a huge connection. I mean, I was taking my kids the other day to an ice cream shop that's a drive-by right now in Los Angeles. And I said to my husband as a joke, as we were leaving, as we were heading out the door, I said, we're going to the drug dealer right now. We're gonna do a drive-by at the drug dealer. Because it's a drug, for these little kids. I mean, I watch their eyeballs light up when I tell them we're going to get ice cream, and then like the manic behavior around it, not just like after they have it, but in anticipation of it, the prospect of it being taken away for some reason until they get their hands on it.
Do they jump up and down with their hands up? Like when I tell my kid, I'm like, we're going to get frozen yogurt and ice cream. He'll jump up and like wave his hands and like this excitement where I'm like, dude, it's just ice cream, man. So I get what you're saying.
Not. It's a drug. It's their drug. It's their drug. That's the thing. I mean, sugar is addictive, and as addictive as some other drugs, but of course it doesn't require that kind of labeling. I mean, could you imagine if every time you were going to go eat an Oreo, it said, this food is, should be administered with caution because it is highly addictive.
And they should say that about all these sugar, right? To be honest. Then we could be more aware. But, even as a clinical psychologist, I wasn't taught that what you eat really makes a difference. I mean, obviously I graduated in 2000. So the idea is that I don't really think that I taken any classes that had said to me that the food should be part of our treatment plan. I'm a clinical psychologist, so the emphasis was more on clinical. What do you do with this depression? What are your treatment plan in making sure that the person manages their depression? What are their coping skills? What are their defense mechanism? But it was never really that diet should be part of it. I mean, I started implementing it on my own in a way, because I started reading, I realized that this is, especially this part of the world, I felt like maybe we do need to use it because people, tend to eat a lot more sugar. We have a very high number of people that are diabetics here. So I felt like, okay, well, this is good. But really, technically, I feel like it doesn't teach the students that in school. It didn't teach me any of that concept of understanding your diet, or how does this affecting your mood, and how can we help our patients deal with it. And so it's really great to have people like yourself who are really trying to go out there and really educate people in general about what are you putting in your body when you're obese and you're overweight. And then you're surprised you're depressed. Why are you surprised that you're depressed?
Or if you're underweight, believe it or not, here in Los Angeles, it's a huge, huge issue. Young females here and the influences of social media and magazines and sort of snapshots of people's lives that are really antithetical to how, we all ought to be living, but sort of, these disillusioned, moments that young women have when they look on screens and feel like their life isn't enough, that they're not doing enough, they're not beautiful enough. And so many of these photos, that they're comparing themselves against are photoshopped and really not even representative of what, the woman who is in charge of the advertising campaign looks like in reality. And so, I think that obesity is a huge problem, as you know, here in the United States. Diabetes is prevalent, but there's also the undernourishment. What's interesting is that you can be an obese person who isn't getting enough food of the right kind.
Yep.
And so, it's easy enough to say, okay, we'll lose weight by consuming fewer calories, but what is the quality of the food that you are consuming? And are you going to get enough vitamins and minerals and complete, amino acid combinations to have your brain function optimally to, minimize depressive and compulsive and anxious tendencies and all of those things? Because if you're eating 1,200 calories a day and losing tons of weight, but what you're eating isn't, a balanced meal, or your proteins aren't whole proteins, or if all of your proteins are meat, as opposed to, getting any kind of plant fiber and the prebiotics that come with that. I'm winking at you when I say meat, and I know it's great, but the prebiotics that come from plant fiber and all of that it's essential to overall sense of well-being. And we know now, in science, this is science. Scientists have confirmed many times over now that our gut microbiome is largely responsible for our mood. And 70%, of, I think it's our immune system, lives in our gut. And so what we're putting in our body in that sense, in particular, as it relates to sugar and foods that become toxic if the liver can't process it. So, meat in small portions, great, but the serving size of meat that I see my husband, for instance, consume, it's putting a great deal of pressure on his liver. So, or, alcohol can do the same. A great, glass of wine at night, perfect, ideal. But, not when you're consuming so much that your body is having to work, really hard to expel toxins as opposed to absorb and metabolize food, and or put its energy on healing and replenishing and, keeping all of your other vital organs really awake and alive. So
yeah, I was just going to say, but isn't it kind of twofold? I mean, for instance, this is where I differ with a lot of vegans, because I believe everyone has a balanced diet, or, there are certain foods that work with your body better than others. And when I was talking to Dr. D this afternoon, I told her, I was like, look, food does a lot. I changed my diet in the last 3 weeks. I started, I love it. I started adding more red meat into my diet.
Just like an IV infusion.
Oh my God. That's what it
just like blood dripping straight in. Just like it was like a blood transfusion, essentially.
It exactly was that. I felt like super.
You skipped the car accident and went straight to the blood transfusion. I love
100%.
it. Very efficient.
And it just the changes were within 3 days to my mood. And not only that, to my performance. I mean, my performance, I reduced my carbohydrates.
Right.
I kept them at about 150 grams, maybe 100 grams, something like that. I reduced them dramatically. But my vegetables, I was eating like 2 handfuls of vegetables, like that just really kind of,
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking sweet potatoes, peas, carrot, all the stuff that I really like.
Mm-hmm.
And within 4 days, like I saw huge changes. My strength went through the absolute roof.
Right.
Whatever it is with
You literally tore the roof off your house.
pretty much.
You now live just in 4 walls. Sunshine all day long streaming in.
I mean, hey, look, when you can hit a personal best at 38 of, 15 extra pounds on the bar, that's a big jump. And I equated that all to food in the last 2 weeks.
Right. Right. And here's what's tricky. I mean, we kind of alluded to this in our previous conversation, but every single human is different and has different requirements. And from day to day, the requirements of an individual shifts, right? So like if you're training and you're doing 3 times the number of reps that you normally do because you're about to enter a competition, your diet that day may be different than it is on a recovery day. If Dr. D has seen 4 patients that were highly volatile and were emotionally draining or, mentally toxic for her and she's having to cleanse, she might choose some raw salads as opposed to a heavier meal. So there's sort of an independent analysis that I think has to be applied,
100%.
Day by day. I have to say the sugar piece, it's so heartbreaking for me because I just love it. I love goodies. I love comfort food. We made pumpkin cake last night with chips, chocolate chips.
Oh, that feels so good.
Wow.
That sounds so good.
And I had a big chunk of it before bed. And immediately, every time I eat too much sugar, my nose starts to run. It just happens every time. It's like an inflammatory response I've had since I was, in my, late teens. And so I'm eating this and I'm trying to kind of outrun the response. So I'm like eating it fast, thinking like, all right, maybe I can like trick it and sort of bypass it if I just kind of put it. But like the body keeps the score, as the book says. We know that we can't trick our body. Ultimately, it's going to experience a consequence. And so for you, that consequence is really positive when you minimize starches. Now, what I will say is that the male diet
and sugars, by the way, I did
and
cut out.
Starches convert to sugar.
Yeah, but I cut out look, I'm not going to lie. I was eating, I'd go up to my mother's and, I'd be eating some Doritos. I'll have like Fritos, I'll grab like a handful of that. If there's like a cake in there, or like some chocolate, I'll grab a handful of that. So I wasn't being smart.
Maybe your mother needs to be on this conversation.
Oh, she definitely does. Don't get me wrong.
I'm ready to have a chat with her.
She's like, oh, how did I gain so much weight? And I'm like, Ma, I come to your house to eat chips.
Right. There's 14 kinds of chips in the pantry.
Yeah, I come over here for my junk food. So that's telling me something.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a big awakening this week where, unfortunately, Postmates and DoorDash, I don't know if you guys have local delivery services like courier services. Yeah. This was not a thing. This was not a thing when I was, a teenager and in my 20s and 30s, early 30s. And I just this past year discovered these courier services. And it's like with one click, you could have like raw vegan dough balls, covered in sprinkles at your door within 25 minutes. And recently I found myself discovering all of these new fabulous bakeries. And it's like, oh, we can have a tea party with my daughter with little fairy cupcakes and this thing and that thing. And I said to my husband, literally this morning, I said, okay, I need to just ban all of these courier services unless what I'm ordering is dinner because it's a night where I've worked late and don't have time to cook something healthy and fresh for my kids. Otherwise, just to have a person come to my home to drop off 4 chocolate croissant. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like from a financial standpoint, but from a physical standpoint, I'm thinking, gosh, I am that little rat in the lab that's pressing the lever over and over and over, like with every click. And I know I'm going to get the reward, and it's like, I don't remember. I think it was James Olds, maybe in 1953, did one of those initial experiments with rats where Skinner. And so there were a few of these different studies done, and basically the rats chose to kill themselves. I mean, they ultimately commit suicide because they were so addicted to the dopamine hit that they stopped eating, they stopped procreating. They were literally just, completely consumed by pressing the lever. And that's, I think, what sometimes happens to us when we're eating. It's like we want that dopamine hit and we want that feeling of being alive and awake in a heightened reality. for a moment. And then the minute it diminishes, we fall flat on our faces. And it's a really uncomfortable feeling.
Well, I remember we had somebody on our on the show. Remember, Mandy, where she talked about sugar, and she talked about people withdrawing from people withdrawing from sugar. It was like, and she worked at a rehab center, and she was like, what she noticed that people were withdrawing. The symptoms of people withdrawing from cocaine was the same as people that were withdrawn from sugar. So, and that's like and I think people don't really understand. Except the difference is that cocaine is illegal. So you don't see it and you're not tempted with it unless you're in that circle. Right. But then sugar, we're tempted by every day. I mean, and especially don't you notice that because of COVID and because of the quarantine and people being at home more often, it just seems like, and the anxiety of the unpredictable or, what's going to happen and when are we going to go back to that norm, whatever that norm is, that people start to look for food that is very comforting. And the first thing you think about, for me, I think about I was just telling Mandy, he's like, did you change anything else? He's like you. Well, I did start eating M&Ms. I love peanut M&Ms. I don't bring sweet stuff to the house, but sometimes you feel like you really need that, but then you don't realize how we need it so bad that we can't stop eating it. Yeah. And then it becomes a habit so quickly,
Right. And also, it's like the difference between being a social drinker and an alcoholic. Like if you get really cranky and angry when you can't have your peanut M&Ms, that's indicative of a deeper psychological attraction or draw or dependence, right? Because even if you habituate it for a period of time, if you can easily take the habit away, it's not necessarily a problem. In my opinion, it becomes a problem when it's a crutch that without, we don't function, whether it's physically or emotionally or mentally, in a way that's healthy and appropriate. And I definitely found at the very beginning of I would say the first several months of COVID and being on lockdown here in Los Angeles with a barely 3 and 5-year-old at the time and working full time, that I was heavily psychologically dependent on my treats and comfort foods. And I'm not sure if it was as much, the dopamine and serotonin, influences, or if it was just the idea of having something to look forward to. And at a certain point, I made a list of things that made me feel really good, that were uplifting to me, whether it was like a TV show or a bath or taking a walk or listening to a podcast. I actually made a list of alternative things. Because if you don't have backup options, of course, you're always going to gravitate to the thing that feels good, right? It's like being in a bad relationship, with a lover who, is not really the best choice, but you don't really know if you can do better or what the alternative is. But if you know there's something better out there, it's easier to say goodbye, right? So we sort of have to trust in our resilience and understand that if we do take away some of those comfort foods, there are all these other beautiful replacements, But I do think moderation is key. For me personally, when I give myself an imperative or if my expectations become too rigid, I find myself wanting something more. Again, the bad relationship, right? Like if someone is forbidden and you can't be with them, there's a level of intrigue simply because the body wants what it wants without having certain kinds of boundaries, imposed upon it. But if you are in control and making the choice, it may or may not even actually be interesting to you. You know what I mean? So for me, I find when it comes to food, the more strict I am, the more rigid I am, the more compulsively I think about that thing. It's this fine balance of going wow, yes, I can have anything I want at any time, but I know what the consequences are, right? That if you have too many peanut M&Ms or too much cinnamon in your water or, for Mahdi, too much sugar and too many starchy foods, you're not going to feel great. You're going to be bloated and depleted and tired, lethargic, maybe a little cranky. And so then it becomes a matter of just really weighing choices and understanding consequences versus having to control what you eat, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think it makes sense because we as humans, it's the same thing as the time that you say, I'm going to go on a diet. That's the day you eat the most. And it's because you become so obsessed with it. And also because you don't want this diet to be in control of you. I think this is all human behavior. And I think if people can just educate themselves on what goes into their body, like write down everything that you're eating and trying to be aware, because a lot of times I think people are not aware of what they've been putting in their body and, how bad it is, because we all want to be in denial. We all want to act like, no, our diet is great. And if we write it down, then we have to face our demons by realizing, well, maybe some of the stuff that we're right, but also to understand that this is a lifestyle, that it's not something that, and I'm like you, I'm into moderation. Like, okay, well, so what if I ate those M&Ms? I think the next day I'm going to make a better choice. That way I'm not feeling guilty. And then I could really engage in emotional eating, to be honest. And I think that's another thing, is people understanding emotional eating and how they are deprived, especially during COVID, where they feel like they're not in control of their environment, or at least here we still have curfew and we still have a lot of unpredictability, that you think it's the only thing you can control is eating and eating bad food. It's like somehow I feel like it's like self-sabotaging, right?
Right. I think the reason we're choosing the bad food is really because of the chemical reaction when we get that serotonin rush, and then it becomes a dopamine rush. That becomes the drug that makes us feel okay for a moment, or that balances some of the feelings of depression and anxiety, like you were saying, of the unknown. But unfortunately, it's just extremely temporary. And the nature of the beast is that the minute it diminishes, you need more to replicate that feeling. So if you don't have other coping mechanisms, and it's your job personally to provide them for people, this is what you do for a living. But a lot of people don't have other stress management skills. And I'm curious to know what you recommend for people as a substitute for eating. If someone's making choices that aren't in their best interest, or maybe over consuming during COVID, what would you suggest?
What I've been working on is to be able to have people set themselves on a routine and to be able to use this time, because really when we do go normal, whatever that is, we are going to go working and we're not going to have a lot of time with ourselves. And I'm the type of person who I'm teaching people to be able to understand that you got to utilize this time. It's not in our hand how long we're going to stay home, but while we are home, why don't we come up with a list of things that we wanted to work on? Like I've had people, even students, like have developed some cooking, habits, and they've started to taking a lot of virtual classes for like painting, for example, or people that have been able to, you don't have anything else to do. How about like we do some yoga classes virtually, since everyone else is doing it? And it's so interesting, like the people I've even finished a research on resiliency, but it was more about what helped you during COVID. And some people were really been able to express the idea that we can develop new skills, or I can learn a new thing that I've always wanted to learn. I didn't have time, or even myself being able to finish up certain workshop that I wanted, or update my knowledge on DSM-5, for example, the diagnosis, and I think these routines, but also I think for people I work with, they don't know they're emotional eaters. Just last week, I've been working with her for 2 years. She is overweight and she just did the sleeve or the surgery, which is very common here also. They can't go on a diet. They don't know how to control their eating. They'll go ahead and use surgeries, for example. So, and so she did surgery, even though she's very young, and I was totally against it. But anyway, she was very, very overweight, like 130 kilos. So it's a lot. And so then it just clicked to her. Okay, so you're upset at your dad. What'd you do? Then I start having people really write their steps. And she just finally realized, okay, I was upset at my dad. I went to the kitchen and I went to have some salty stuff. And then finally, when you have people writing, what do you do when you're angry? Where do you go? What's the next step?
Right.
Because I think a lot of people
precedes it, basically.
Because I think people that are emotional eaters do not know that they're emotional eaters. They just think they love food. There's a difference between loving food and using food as comfort.
Right. And also, it's like what's occurring to me is I realized, so I don't overeat. I've never been an overeater. I mean, I have put on some pounds during COVID, but it's not what I struggle with. Even though I love pastries and things like that, I do eat moderately. But I was in therapy over COVID and doing phone sessions, and it became very intense at one point. I was, I think this particular phenomenon of the pandemic has brought people who may have been sort of able to function through certain levels of repressed trauma to their knees. I mean, I had sort of started more deep work in the past, maybe 5 years, but I really cracked, Pandora's box basically opened during COVID. And I found myself literally visualizing chocolate muffins during parts of conversations that became really intensely uncomfortable. And it was something I've never done before. I mean, it almost is like a very childish thing to do when you think of, I can't believe I'm even verbalizing this out loud, but really as a almost 40-year-old woman, what I realized that that's my little lifesaver. Those little muffins, those are my little life rafts. That was for me symbolic of, oh, this is a distraction. First of all, oh, this is getting uncomfortable. So instead of feeling what I'm feeling, I'm going to think about something very light and frivolous that isn't emotional. And it's also going to be my symbol of comfort, And I think it's true. And to ask yourself, okay, what precipitated that choice? If you ate, 4 Big Macs, how are you feeling that day? Was there an event that may have triggered it? Or did you have an uncomfortable conversation? Were you bored? Were you angry? What is the catalyst for you? It's very powerful.
Right. And trying to get people to, most of the time you'll get these people that are not ready to be able to explore that, or the connection between the way they eat and the way they feel. It's like, well, I was just hungry, not really understanding that, and it takes a process. Why are they choosing, why are you choosing that type of food? And I think after a while, when people become comfortable, that they want to open that Pandora's box, that they start to really connect that there is. And sometimes it doesn't have to be very traumatic, but it's more stressful, like having a conversation with my dad, like this person, or this other person's like, I had to stay at home with my mom. And then, like you said, is like, I think it did have a lot of effect on us, Corona.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a way, I was enjoying it, because I work all the time and I'm away from home all the time. So it was nice for me. But at the same time, I could see it gives you time to reflect. And those people that were not ready to reflect or stay home with people that they don't really like, then, they got to find another way to, and then, well, we're all going to die. I mean, these ideas is like, well, it's Corona. We might all die. We might as well eat all the chocolate.
Right. Well, that's just a justification. I mean, you could die crossing the street too. So we can always find reasons to justify behavior that isn't in our best interest long term. But, I think your point about not being ready is a really valid one, and a strong one, because it's like using drugs, or being an alcoholic. If you're not ready to give that up, you're not ready. It's interesting. I have a friend, a really close friend, whose nephew is an addict, and he's been in and out of rehab. And, there was a point at which his family was planning like the 4th intervention for him. And he called my friend and was saying, God, I can't believe this is happening again. They're putting so much pressure on me, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, my friend said to him, you know what? You're not done. You're not done. And I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm certainly not, a substance abuse person. And I doubt that is wise advice in the long run, or advice that maybe a professional would give. But it made so much sense to me as my friend was relaying the conversation, that you have to be ready. You have to be ready to let go of the things that you're addicted to, whether it's a relationship, whether it's food, whether it's, alcohol or drugs. If you're not ready, you're just going to default back into the same pattern. And maybe it starts with a question or a certain level of curiosity, like, why am I doing this thing? Like, is it getting me to where I want to go in my life? Do I care about my life? If I don't care about my life, what makes me feel worthless? Or what makes me feel like I may as well be dead? No one will care. Or, it's like, if we start to ask those basic questions, maybe without the expectation of having a clear answer, that may be a way to sort of begin to facilitate openness to people who aren't ready. I think rushing to the solution or rushing to the cure can put a lot of pressure on people. But maybe if we begin to ask questions like you are, like, oh, okay, well, what happened? What happened an hour before? What happened a day before you made that choice? And how does that feeling that you had, or that event, how does it maybe mirror other feelings and events from, your past, where similar things have come up and you habituated reacting a certain way?
And the other thing that I ask is like, why do you want to change? I mean, why are you calling me? What is it exactly? What made this time different? When you Well, it's the depression of it's substance abuse. And like you said, I think your friend is true, because the idea is that a lot of times, I'm not a drug or rehab counselor, but and it's not my specialty, but I know from people that I've worked with, is the idea is that a lot of times they'll go to rehab because their friends told them, or their family told them, or because they feel a sense of guilt that they've made all these chaos in the family life, that they want to kind of like, make it all better for the family, but they're not personally. So it's the same thing as someone wanting to lose weight, and I want to lose weight because of my, my family, or because I see in social media, they all look great when they're skinnier. But these are the things, like I was just tasting a chapter on conformity. And I was saying to them, like, the best conformity is self-persuasion in a way. Because if you're not persuaded because someone told you to be persuaded, so that's like a sample for our life. If we're not self-persuaded, we really want to watch what we want to eat and to really change our lifestyle, it's not going to work.
That internal motivation has to be there. I'm learning that with my kids. I don't readily admit this, but the very first parent-teacher conference I had when my son was, 3.5 years old in preschool, the teacher said to me, I'm just curious, she's looking at me and my husband, do you bribe your son? And she really caught me off guard, right? And I said, what do you mean by that? You know what I mean, Shauna. I said, yes, we do. Like, if you do this, we'll give you this kind of thing, I said, well, why do you ask? She said, well, he's bribing his friends. And he's really intelligent. And so, the manipulation is actually kind of adorable when you're 3 because it's just so clever. But, it's not appropriate. And we don't want to teach him that this is a way, to ultimately invite the kinds of responses that he's looking for. We want other children to make decisions that come from their heart. And we want him to have conversations that are honest and clean. And I said, well, can you give me an example, of the kind of thing that he might say to another child in the classroom? And she said, yeah, like, for instance, if there's a block that he wants to play with, he'll say something like, I will give you the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow if you give me that block. Or I will give you 1 million tiny real dinosaurs that will live in your backyard. If you come with me to play this game, and so and they were all
That's a smart kid right there.
He's now 6. Right, he's got a better memory than I do. He fixes things in the house that I can't. I mean, he's phenomenal. He's a little engineer and super creative and talented, but it made me think really deeply about my parenting. And how, from a state of fatigue and desperation, my default mode is like, if you don't do this, you won't get that. Or if you do this, you'll get that. And then he's, of course, behaving from a place of either wanting to please me, wanting to get something, or wanting to not have something taken away. And as an adult, the best place, of course, to function from is one of internal motivation and sincerity. And it's what I founded my company on, is this premise of really genuinely having something of value to share. But as little people, like, a lot of us are poorly parented. And so I have taken upon the challenge. I have, invited the challenge now of not bribing my children and not relying too heavily on consequences to see if I can stir them to change their behavior or modify their behavior based on their own desire. It's the same thing as kids get older and are in school. And, you want them, of course, as a mother, to get good grades, I'm sure. But what's motivating them? The A, the B, the car that you're going to buy for them if they graduate from high school? Like, what is motivating them? And, how do those paradigms influence the way they walk through the world as adults, right? Have you had a similar experience with your clients in terms of feeling like their internal motivation, isn't there, and you're trying to sort of figure out, is that something you can create and generate and inspire in someone, or help them inspire in themselves? Or is it just a matter of timing? Like, I don't know that these conversations are really being had.
No, and I think, and once they start understanding that, that's the reason why I say, well, what do you want to work on? I mean, other people have told you that you have anger management, or you're coming because your wife or husband, or kids because their parents have brought them, whatever. You have to really understand that, especially for psychotherapy, I think people have to be ready to make that change and they have to be ready that they are going to work for change. It's not just like, spending your money on sessions and don't want to make it. And you could tell, can you plant that internal motivation? Of course you can. And actually, I think a lot of people do come to psychotherapy. They're not really motivated. They know they got to work on something, but they don't know exactly. Or, yes, I want to have a better life. Or yes, I want to lose weight so I can look like all the other pretty people on TV. And but I think
they're airbrushed. Let's remember.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I was telling my students. They are airbrushed, but still, the idea is that I want to look good because of this person, or I don't want to be depressed because I want to be happy. Like the expectation people have of themselves, that's not really realistic. And trying to like break it down to make sure that you understand that, what motivates you. How about we set up, and maybe their expectation is not what these other people have told them, and that told them, go to fix yourself. Maybe that's not what they want, but they're doing it because everyone else is telling them.
Right.
So therefore, something must be wrong with me. And granted, maybe there is something wrong with him or her, but it's not the way they understand it. It's the way other people have told them to change it.
So maybe the only way that they would really sort of latch on to the belief system that change is valuable is to experience a benefit from it. So even if they begin doing something for reasons that they don't inherently possess, in ways that feel valuable to start, because they're maybe mimicking other people's behavior or feeling pressured into a choice or choosing to make change for reasons that don't feel ideal in your eyes. Maybe if they begin to experience relief or a benefit that continues to motivate them. I mean, I definitely, as someone who isn't prone to working out and doesn't love to work out, I know that when I move my body, I feel so good. It does motivate me to do more, but it's not until after I've had the experience that I want to do it again or that I acknowledge the benefit. I don't feel good going into it, in other words. Like I don't feel inspired to do it pretty much ever. And there are people who really love to do it and are like, I can't wait for my workout. It's going to feel good. I want to work hard. That's not me. I want to stroll and chat and munch. But I know that when I do it, it feels good. And so I have that muscle memory and I have that understanding now that if I do that, I will feel better, which you don't know until you start, and that I feel like that's kind of tricky for people. Is like, gosh, how do you make that plunge?
The human mind is so polluted right now, especially with social media and all the crap that we see at gyms and everything with the classes and then this and then that. And, I see it a lot as a trainer, and as a coach at times. I see the worst of it and I see the best of it. And my philosophy will never change that I always start with the basics because I want people to love what they do and to have that self-gratification and that reward policy that is built in that can substitute social media. Because, let's face it, you see people working out and then they're, lifting crazy amounts of weights or their body looks shredded or whatever. You think you're going to have that reward within a couple of days, but it's not happening, and the airbrush and all this, it just adds to it. And to me, I think it pollutes people's minds, and not just from a fitness perspective, but in terms of overall look, feel, the foods that they eat, and I go back to what happened to me 2 weeks ago. I knew that when I reduce carbs, when I increase meats, I feel better. And like you said, you knew that about yourself with exercise and working out. And for me, I got within 3 days, I was like, holy shit, I feel amazing right now. My mood's better, my sleep's better, everything, the whole 9 yards, and I was like, why would I go back to eating crap that makes me feel crappy? You know what I mean? That reward happens so fast because of my self-actualization and understanding what I knew about myself. And right now, I think a lot of people, especially teenagers or people in their tweens, like 20s and early 30s too, are just so...
I have a 20-year-old sister.
They're so lost. Their decision-making skills are so polluted with the shit that they see on social media because they're growing up with it.
They've basically been parented by social media because we know that when you enter your teens, okay, Dr. D would know a lot more about this than I do, but my understanding is that once you move into, even preteens, the influences of peers tend to be more powerful than the influences of even parents. And so when you're looking at social media, which, as we were saying before, are snapshots that are unrealistic representations of people's lives and that are captured in order to create a certain perception that makes people think and feel a certain way about you. It's engineered, and manufactured for a very specific result, which is, generally speaking, to have a person look at you and say, wow, she's amazing or beautiful or has a great life or she's happy. And it's a smokescreen. I mean, very few people are actually having the experience that's being represented in the imagery that is associated with them on social media. But it's now like so much of their interaction is actually through these networks that, are all very misleading and convoluted and aren't accurately representing how anyone is thinking or feeling. So no one really even knows how anyone else is thinking or feeling. And you're just left to assume that it's better than how you're feeling. And then you feel crappy all the time because you're comparing yourself to this false standard. I'm so glad I'm not in that generation and that I barely know how to use social media. I feel like because I'm very susceptible. And I feel like I was already such a damaged teenager in terms of my sense of self-worth and how long it took me to identify who I was. I cannot imagine the pressure of that level of exposure.
And I think it's true. You have a lot more access to comparison that I had in my generation. I mean, if you compared yourself with real people outside or when you went to a wedding or, you hear it from your relatives maybe, but the idea is that here it doesn't. It's there's a false pretentious of what is beautiful. And especially if you're a type of person, for example, that you can never be that size 0 or that size 2. And that takes us back to what you were saying earlier about even in your area, having this eating disorder. I mean, I never thought that I was going to diagnose eating disorder as young as 8 years old.
I'm pretty sure I had one at 8 years old. I'm pretty sure I had an eating disorder at 8 years old.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I definitely had one when I was 14. Yeah.
Back in the days, they didn't diagnose them or we didn't see them until they were like 12 years old.
Right.
Or when they started their preteen, right? And now we know that they are, and I think one of the reasons is because they are parenting. They're being parented through social media. They already have a view of what's beautiful, what's the right size, what should everyone be wearing. And that pressure that they have, I mean, they're already struggling with identity. Nevertheless, it's like what the society wants you to be. So,
and it's interesting. I can imagine, I'm feeling like it may be a no-win situation for a lot of mothers, because if you have a mother who's really beautiful and is aging gracefully, but works really hard at it, and so maybe is dieting or dyeing hair and those kinds of things, wearing makeup, a child is looking at that. But if you have a mother who doesn't take care of herself and maybe is obese, I could easily see a child sort of rebelling against that and saying, I never want to be like that, or I don't want to age like that or look like that. So, I mean, it's like weird, like it's such a fine line, like as a mother, how you walk through the world, having confidence and, maintaining what you feel is a sense of beauty, given what your ideal is for yourself, and understanding like what the modeling is for your child and how that may affect them. I mean, I had 2 really gorgeous mothers. My biological mother was a Playboy bunny, commercial model, stunning. I mean, she looked like was Elizabeth Taylor, and is stunning. And my stepmother was a very famous actress in the 80s, completely different physically. My natural mother, my biological mother is, brunette and Irish, and with green eyes. And my stepmother is blonde hair, blue eyes, super tall. But the commonality was that they were both really beautiful. They both had certain kinds of augmentation procedures that I was looking at, and then didn't realize at 12 years old that it was not, the chest that they were naturally born with. And I was going like, why isn't this happening to me? Why am I not becoming a woman yet? And what's wrong with my body? And I'm a little girl still. And then, watching the dieting and all of that, which I think really influenced my behavior. I think, I remember as a young person feeling this incredible pressure to be beautiful and to try, and as if that was like a worthy goal somehow, or that it was worthy of my energy. And now that I'm almost 40, I'll be 40 in July, and am out of the era where I feel like that's a priority for me. Like the moment I had children, my perspective shifted, and it was like, wow, all I really, really want to invest my time and energy in is my children, my business, feeling like I'm contributing something meaningful and valuable to the world. And I sort of let myself go like too much. And so I'm finding my way back now, understanding that like I'm a completely different person than I was in my teens and 20s when I was trying so hard, to have sex appeal and to be, attractive to really other women as much or more as to men. It's interesting. I think women relate to each other more intimately in certain ways, and men think we're doing it for them. Like half the time it was like, I just wanted other women in my circle, in my tribe, to feel like I was, on par with how they look. And it really is a major identity shift that happens as we get older, and we have to constantly find our heart and soul in it and understand what our center is and what's at the core of our value and being, because otherwise we can get very lost and distracted by what isn't happening. Like, I am not going to wake up looking fresh every day, automatically. Like, even if I get 9 hours of sleep, there was a time where I could get 4 hours of sleep, of course, in my 20s and early 30s. And I looked like I had slept 9 hours and I was fresh and glowing. And now I can sleep 9 hours. And sometimes my husband will be like, "Are you tired? Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I feel great. I feel great. I'm just almost 40 and I don't wear makeup." So, it's this thing of like me now constantly having to check in with myself and go like, where is my sense of value coming from? Where am I deriving my sense of self-worth? Because if it's too contingent on any one thing, whether it's my career or my children or the way I look and feel, it's problematic.
Right. And I think what you're saying is like, we're all looking for legacy. And I think when you start to reach a certain age, then now you're wondering, what is my legacy?
Yeah.
How much time do I have to reach it? Or, obviously you found your passion in supplement and in teaching people what they should eat and not eat, and how is this contributing to their mental health or even their purpose in life. And I think that's the important thing, is that we each have to reach a point in our life at a certain age that now we need to find a purpose. And yes, I would have liked to have a purpose when I was 20, but obviously that's not realistic, because that's when you start to do your identity. So that way, when you reach your late 30s or early 40s, then you can start pursuing that purpose. So I think that's what now you're thinking, okay, what is my purpose?
Yes.
That's great.
Right. And, I think people can have definitely more than one, and it can change. I mean, even now, I was a singer and songwriter for many years. I'm about to go back into the studio.
Wow, that's amazing.
So it's like, there's so many different channels of expression and ways of communicating. And for me, all of my passion is about storytelling. It's telling my story, hearing people's stories. I love having these conversations with amazing women and men like you on podcasts. I wrote a memoir during the pandemic. So writing is a big passion as well. And so, under the umbrella of purpose, I think there are also many different ways to pursue our dreams and to, see at different stages of our lives, different areas and outlets kind of light up, and have a voice.
That's right. I mean, when I leave this earth, I want to be able to feel content that I did contribute and I had a purpose. And I think one of the reasons that a lot of times the people I, work with is that a lot of times they don't have a purpose, and they could be in their late 30s and early 40s, and they're still confused and don't know and because they're so bombarded either by social media or the influence of families, as we're a collectivist society here. So you got all these, we're all over the place because we don't know how to be true to ourselves, because then you are committed to your family, or you're not committed to your family. Should I do this because this is what I want, or is this my family? And so I want to be able to leave this world feeling like I've accomplished something, and whatever.
Well, it's so incredible that you've been able to find an authentic path. And what I'm hearing from you and what you just said is that a lot of people are choosing the path that is their family's path, and which is really mirroring what you were talking about before in terms of why people make certain choices and come to, well, my parents wanted me to come, or my wife or husband wanted me here, but I don't really know what I'm doing here. Okay, well, you could be a doctor. You could be an engineer, maybe because that was what was expected of you, or you come from a family of doctors. But if your heart is the heart of an artist, to me, that breeds depression and potentially anxiety as well, because you're not doing the thing you're meant to do. And there are many different things that we may be meant to do as individuals. There's not, I don't think, a one clear path for everyone. But if you are living in denial of that authentic voice and the thing that makes you come alive and that you feel is your offering on this planet, I feel like that's the beginning of disease. And there's such a huge, as we know, connection between the mind and the body, and what's repressed will find a way to express itself. So if it's not expressing itself in a painting because it feels like it needs to be, performing surgery, it may express itself in cancer or in anxiety or OCD,
Yeah, it's true. Well, thank you very, very much. This was really, I'm so happy I know that Maddie said something about you, but I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm glad that you have an interest in psychology. And I think psychology plays a big role in a lot of things that we're talking about, or even health and fitness. And I just wish more people would consider that, that is an important aspect. Like, you can't talk about food without talking about your mind, and you can't talk about your mind without talking about your food and your way of life. And I think it's great that you're trying to implement all of it.
Seriously, thank you, Shauna, for coming back on. It was great having you. It was great listening to the conversation, ladies. I'm glad I got to say about 4 words.
Well, you could have joined more, but you decided to let the lady
you guys
take the lead.
Hey, you guys had a handle on it, and there are just things that I just leave to people that probably could explain things a lot better than me at times.
You can explain meat, though.
100%, but I can only explain meat to other guys and vegans. All right. I mean, that's it. My one argument to most vegans, and this is what I kind of stump them on every time. I'm like, look, 2,000 years ago, we weren't walking around foraging for just plants and berries and, whatever. You were going to eat whatever you could find. Why we have an appendix where we don't need our appendix anymore? You would eat a carcass if you found it on the side of whatever, 2,000 years ago or whatnot. So, when people say, oh, we are only meant to eat plants, that's my biggest argument is like, no, we weren't. If we were only meant to eat plants. Now, granted, meat is an expensive luxury to have, and it was difficult to find. So people did probably eat less meat.
Not as expensive as Postmating 6 little vegan donut balls to my house every day. Between the tip and the courier service, I was like, I did the math. Like, these are $18 worth of tiny little balls in my. This is insane. Killing my budget.
Look, vegan desserts are awesome. I'll be the first one to say,
they're so good because they're really rich,
100%
and moist,
100%. Right? That's the best part. The protein stuff is horrible. It is so dry.
I think you should start a diet called the carcass diet. Imagine the trend. No one's done it. It's the only diet no one's tried.
Right?
So, back in the day when we were foraging, we would have eaten a carcass if we had to.
I know,
it's
right?
Like, maybe it could be like mental perseverance and getting in touch with our primal nature. And
hey, if I was in the middle of nowhere, I'd eat whatever I could find. If I found a turtle in the middle of the desert, I'd eat the turtle. It just comes down to that. If I found a dandelion, I would eat it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like...
My son watches these survival shows with my husband.
Awesome.
My son is like a little animal, and he's so super into, anything primal. And so he's been asking me a lot of questions lately, like, if you were on an island and it was just you and me, would you eat me? You know what? No, your tushy is fabulous and juicy, and I would be tempted, but I would restrain myself. I love you too much.
So, Shauna, before you go, I will invite you on for a little debate that we can have: vegan versus carnivore. How does that sound?
I'm not an expert in that because first of all, I'm not a vegan. I eat eggs and honey.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were.
I eat fish. I eat salmon like twice a week. So I'm a pescatarian who doesn't eat cheese. So, and if it's like a beautiful cheese board at an Italian restaurant, I will. But I buy vegan cheese in my home and I eat vegan yogurt. And that's because of my inflammatory history. But no, I eat, salmon is a huge part of my diet. My kids eat lots of wild salmon too.
All right. I take back the debate.
So, and by the way, I don't know that there's anything wrong with veganism per se, because my diet is like 95% vegan if I were to break it down. But every time I go to a vegan cafe in LA, everyone there looks really emaciated and pale. And I'm like, I don't know. Something's missing. Maybe they're not like food combining properly, because to be a vegan, you really have to combine your proteins so that you're getting complete proteins and all the amino acids you eat.
It's so hard.
So seeds and nuts together, peanut butter and the whole wheat bread together, or whatever. There's a number of different combinations and countless of them, but you have to be aware. You can't just eat vegan. Eating a soy burger isn't necessarily the best choice all the time, every day, right? Not only because it affects our estrogen, but because it's not a complete protein.
You had brought up a point earlier about not eating the foods that your body needs, such as certain vitamins and nutrients. I'd cut out potatoes for the longest time, and I'd started having a lot of joint issues. And it was my physical therapist that said, have you changed your diet at all? What foods have you cut out in the last 6 or 7 months? I was like, I don't eat white potatoes anymore. And she was like, well, maybe you should go get your potassium levels checked or, see what's going on there. It could be from that.
Right.
Sure enough, I started eating potatoes again, and a lot of my issues started to kind of disappear over a 2-month period, I would say. And it's sometimes with vegans, I tell my buddies, I'm like, dude, how do you know that you're built for the long haul?
Right.
And I have not met one of my friends who went vegan who stayed vegan for more than a year, including my wife. Which I'll never bring it up to my wife. She went vegan, but...
My very best friend on the planet, who I've been best friends with since I was 2 years old, has been a vegan since we were in our early teens. And she is a true vegan. And she is the healthiest. She's an athlete. She's super healthy. She's a prolific attorney and human rights activist and philanthropist and published author. And she's a vegan. And she's scrupulous about food combining. I think it can be done extraordinarily well.
I think that's our next episode, an invitation for you, so we could talk about the food combinations. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. And again, we would love to have you on again.
Take care. Thank you for having me.
Nice meeting you.
So good to meet you. And thanks again. It was a pleasure. What a delight. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You can also find us on Instagram at The Project Thank You, and join us next time.